can't trick the Sooze.
That's a fun game.
I tried, but you can't trick the Sooze.
Yeah.
He's too quick.
I can also see
You
it.
can also see what we're doing. Well, hello there. My name's HW.
Hey, I'm the Sooze.
Sooze today on Helix Talk. You like that?
I do.
Just came up with that.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it was a couple days ago. I came up with that. Anyway, today on Helix Talk, we're going to talk about how to EQ your Helix like a pro.
Like a pro.
Now, I've done some similar content in the past, but I like this format now. You're here, and here we go. Let's talk about EQing the Helix. EQing the Helix, we can follow a lot of the same sort of general practices that we would in the analog world, or that we would with any device, whether it be Quad Cortex or HX Stomp or Head Rush or Kemper, whatever. There is some principles that we can use, and definitely knowledge of some frequencies that we can use that are going to be well suited for us anywhere. So there's all sorts of places you can EQ. You could EQ in the amp block. You could EQ before the amp block. You could EQ after the amp block, after the IR, after the amp block, before the IR. But here's one thing to know about EQs. It doesn't matter the order of your EQs. Furiously, people are typing you're wrong. Let me finish my statement. It doesn't matter the order of your EQs, whether the EQs are early in the chain or after in the chain. EQs are cumulative. You can add EQs together for infinity. It will come out the exact same unless there's a gain stage. And since every pedal and every amp and even sometimes a preamp that's in a delay and even sometimes maybe some sort of an input a circuit that's in a chorus, since there's lots of gain stages, you can't actually add them all together.
Right.
But you can use multiple EQs next to each other, and it doesn't matter which order. And it really, we want to differentiate between preamp, post-amp. I think the best place to start if you really want to dial in your sound, and I'm talking about you have a great sound, but you really want to get it to where you want it, or you want to dial it in for a mix. You want to be heard. You want two guitars to have different sounds. I would say start post-amp. And the reason is that every producer, every audio engineer, they're EQing post-amp. You're plugging in your amp, you're miking it, and there it is. So that's where they're going to be editing things. They're usually not putting an EQ in your chain before it hits the amp. Right? You usually don't run to the board and then run back to your amp, and they can change it for you. It's always after the amp. So let's start there. And let's go right here to the high-low shelf. So a high-low shelf is where I like to start, and it's going to let us really tailor our sound, and it's going to give us a lot more control than an amplifier is going to have. An amplifier, in this case like a Bandmaster, is going to have this. We have a tone-matched IR running right here, and a model, a Helix model that is emulating my 58 Bandmaster. That amp is going to have, a lot of amps are going to have 1, 2, 3 tone controls, a 3-band EQ, whatever. But you don't get to pick the frequencies. True story, most of these amps, unless it's like a newer Mesa, a kind of a modern amp, there's no active EQs. They're all they're all low pass filters, high or low pass filters. And so all they're doing is attenuating different frequencies in your signal. They're just taking it away. They're not that powerful. They're really not. And so this is going to give us the opportunity, a high-low shelf, to pick a point in the high end and the low end and create a shelf and go up or down. So we're going to create a point, a high-frequency point, and a low-frequency point, and then everything above and below that we can raise or we can lower. And that's going to help us give our sound a little more custom ability. So let's try this. Let's take this Bandmaster and let's jump to 200, because this Bandmaster is going to have a good amount of low end in it. And let's try cutting this low end by 12 and play like some power chords so we can hear that low E string, I'm going to go to 250, and we're going to start with it off, and then we'll turn it on and listen to the sound. I'll turn it on off while you're playing. Sorry. I had us on the reverse delay, which is a little much.
Sabotage.
Let's go. Yes. Saboteur. Let's start with like an overdriven sound, and this gain is good. We can leave it right there. I'll turn it on and off while you play, and there won't be as much delay and burp.
Thank you.
So I started with it on,
Yeah.
and you can hear, just hit like a low E. Now hit it again. I mean, the lower notes on the guitar that really rely on those frequencies are just dramatically different.
Right.
And what we've done is we've taken this amp and we've taken it from sounding this big to sounding this big.
Yeah.
We have not fundamentally changed the tone of the amp. And what do I mean by that? Okay, maybe we have, and depending on how you think of fundamentally the tone of the amp. What we've done, though, is we've shelved the low end a lot. This is a dramatic move. But every preamp I've ever really used, every EQ I've ever really used, all the mic pre's, there's always a little switch that just has a straight line on one end and then a little dip on the other. And that just means they're doing something like this. Now, it doesn't do it 12 dB. I'm trying to make a point.
Yeah.
And it probably is lower. It probably is like 150 or whatever. But let's just say we're going to do that. And let's just say we want to make this thing really, just for the sake of conversation, we're going to bring this thing down to 3K. 3K is going to be like a treble-y frequency, not high mids to me, not super high-end presence at all. This is a treble-y thing. And the guitar, every guitar speaker is producing a lot of 3K. There's definitely 3K in here. So let's choose that frequency, and let's also shelve it down 12 dB. And let's hear what that sounds. We'll start with it off and then on. I mean, it's a big...
Totally mellow.
It's totally mellow. Okay, let's do this in a little more of a usable fashion. I'm going to take down my low frequency stuff here. I'm going to take it down to 200. I'm just going to cut about 5, and I'm going to do something different. I'm going to actually raise the high end of this amp right at about, we'll stick with 3K, and I'll actually raise it. And now this might be an adjustment you might make for a mix or something. You might say, I want a lot of high-end breath and air, and I don't need all that low-end stuff because there's a part that I want to play. You know what I mean? And so we'll start with it off. You can hear kind of the high end, up there.
Sure.
And you can do even more, You can take this up and you can watch out, Who knows?
Give it some sparkle.
Give it some real sparkle. This is really going to change the sound of the amp. We'll start with it off. Now, that actually sounded a lot better than I thought.
Jangly, yeah.
This is a good example of, I do this, everyone does this, EQing with your eyes. To me, plus 9.5 dB, that sounds like, why would you ever do that? But when you were playing the guitar, it sounded fine. And I instantly, my ear goes to, I could hear how that would fit in a mix fine. That could be what the sound you're after.
Yeah.
And if you sort of subscribe to the theory, there are no bad tones, only bad context or bad placement, you know?
Yeah.
Every sound has a... So that's one way that we can tailor our sound. You can take a certain something and just say, hey, I like a little more high end, and you could even take it down to like right here. Let's try this. Here's off and on, just affecting the high end. We're now down at 1.5K. This is where 1.5K is where like 2000, a Klon's going to give you some of that mid-range. So we're bringing up everything sort of like after that, but let's even go down to 1000 so we get some of those high mids, and let's hear how that sounds off and then on. We're adding a lot of signal there, and we're driving the amp more too. And that's the well, we're not driving the amp. We're just adding a lot of signal. It just sounds louder. But that is certainly something you could do.
Yeah.
not really what I would do.
Yeah.
Because if I
It shows
really
you how powerful it is, though.
totally. If I really want more high end, I'm probably not going to be using this much on a shelf. But it's a nice way to sort of dial in, what you want. You could add a little more of the low end, and below 100, you might want a little more, or you might be a guitar player who goes, "Hey, my bass player's got it. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to bring this up to be a little something a little higher, and we'll leave that for now because we're talking about mid-range now. This is where the guitar lives. Now, there we were talking about let's decide the high highs and the low lows, whether we want more or less, and those lows can kind of tell our ear how big an amp is, whether it's a big amp or a small amp. And then it'll also tell our ears, whether it's a shrill amp or a mellow amp or a bright amp or a, sort of stretches all the way up there. But another type of EQ we can use would be like this 10-band graphic EQ. And it doesn't matter whether I use an EQ before or after the IR, because like I said, we're not hitting a gain stage between this EQ, this IR, and here. We would be if we continued this compressor. So it doesn't matter what order I do this in. And that's why I can turn one on before the IR and after, because the IR is just an EQ. Fight me on it. It's just an EQ. When you close mic a guitar amp, it's 17 milliseconds of information. Everything after that is reflection off the floor, the walls, the whatever. 17 milliseconds is what you're going to get if you're close mic. You start pulling that thing away. Now you're opening up the capsule, the ribbon, the whatever, to all sorts of reflections and stuff. And those things will take longer to deliver because it's got to travel to a wall and bounce a longer distance. But you take a 57, you take whatever, you put it up. If you're right up on the grill cloth, you're 17 to 20 milliseconds. And then there's no more info. Everything after that is bouncing on something. Okay, so right here, I'm going to boost some mids. So let's try this. Let's do this in 2 stages. I want to accent my mid-range. One way I can do that is let's pull down highs and lows and see if we can accent our mid-range by getting rid of highs and lows, right? If we subtract highs and lows, we're going to have more mid-range sort of by definition, because that's all we're going to be left with. So I'm going to take this to here, and this is not going to be a huge difference, but I'm also going to enable this second EQ, and I'm going to boost at this tube screamery frequency, 500 hertz.
The magic 500.
The magic 500 hertz. And this is like going to give you that, it's this sound right here, Echo, Lima, Delta, Shield. Okay. Anyway, some people got that. Go ahead. I misspelled shield, by the way. Though.
No, that's
So you can hear taking away some of those highs and lows is a little more subtle way to just reshape the sound of the guitar.
Yeah.
But you can come up here and you can add mid-range. Now here I'm adding the low mids. Let's just hear that without the highs and lows.
It's so funny. That feels really scoops now.
Yeah, right.
It sounded normal when we started.
Right,
but,
and that is a sensation that is like really common and really natural. Your ear, you take a minute to adjust to something, and then you sort of orient to it, and then it changes what you expect. A sound that was fine all of a sudden sounds not fine.
Yeah, the boosted mids becomes normal,
and then you take them away, and it's like something's missing, right? So that is some boosted 500. Now we're really not changing a ton in the frequency range when we just boost one. So let's do a couple things. Let's boost 2K. Let's boost some 4K. Let's cut every like kind of above that just slightly because we just don't want to bring more attention to it. But let's boost all these mids and let's cut everything else. Let's cut these low mids. Let's cut the low stuff. And I mean, this is an aggressive move here, but we're just trying to demonstrate. You know, this is going to sound like a completely different. I mean, it might sound like a flugelhorn. You know what I'm saying? For all you classic flugelhorn fans,
there's a lot of them.
Here we go, off and on. So now I'm just doing slight cuts. I sort of had this crazy mid-range all in one spot.
Yeah.
And a lot of this high end. I took away some of this high end. So now we just have everything between 500 and 1, but really 1 and 2K getting a big boost. And this is like Marshall-y type mid-range that has a big accent there. And, you know, little cuts to the other stuff, but they really don't matter. Try this off and on. You really hear all the pokiness. You're going to come through a mix right there. You're really going to compete with a vocal. You're going to fight with it. And the sound guy's going to get mad at you. If you
unless you're taking the solo.
Right, unless you're in the solo right there.
Right.
Now, we can do that there. We can also come back and we can do a similar thing over here. Now I've got an EQ. Let's try a different EQ. Let's go to the simple EQ. And this is where we get a high and low gain, and we get to choose our mid gain frequency. And what I always think of EQing before an amp as, I think of it as editing the pickups in your guitar. So here we have some P90s, and you know, kind of like these are Sir S90s. These are some of my favorite P90 pickups. Yeah. Yours too. Yeah. This is one of the few guitars we both have the same guitar.
That's true.
And they're great. My number one.
My number one.
Yeah, so get one of these. Yeah. Doing this sort of edits your pickups because the amp doesn't know whether it's hearing pickups plus an EQ, pickups plus an overdrive. It just gets a signal.
Right.
And then it just does its thing. So if I wanted to scoop these, we could, and we want to give it a much more scooped sound. I want to pretend it's a real thin guitar. Not even thin, just real scooped. I could up the gain on the lows. I could up the gain on the highs, and I could take a nice middle frequency like 800, 850, and so I'm getting kind of right in the middle of mid-range that I would be boosting or cutting, and I'm just going to cut it, and we're going to hear the difference, how it changes this guitar. So what we've ended up with is like we took out the mid-range. That made it sound more stratty. We got some brightness, but then we had like this bloated sort of low end, you know, that was really pushing the front end a lot. I would listening to that, you know, back off some of the low end if I wanted to do like a real nice strat interpretation. You know what I mean? I might do something like this. Try that off and on. I think that might be a little better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty stratty.
Yeah. It makes it a smaller sound. It makes the pickup sound smaller.
Yeah.
If I want to go the other way, I can do that. Now, you could achieve a similar thing by taking a tube screamer and not similar to what we've just done, but what we're about to do. We're about to boost the mid-range. You could do a similar thing with a tube screamer. A lot of people do this. They just put the gain on 0, and you sort of get that tube screamery sound. But sometimes you might want a little more control. I think a lot of times you might want a little more control. I used to have some pickups. They were P90s. They were Dream 90s from that old website, guitarfetish.com.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of a weird sounding website if people are looking at your search history, but all they sold was guitar parts. And I remember I set up my rig in the weirdest way, or at the time I thought it was the weirdest way. I would put my amp to overdrive, and I had these like those pickups in a Sheraton, and then I used a Boss GE7 EQ, and I cut the mids and lowered the level just slightly. So when I turned it on, it became on my clean pedal. It took the mids out, and my amp sounded cleaner because I had a little less signal, and I was cutting the mids, so there's less mid-range frequency. So it wasn't driving the amp as hard.
An underdrive.
An underdrive. A Mad Professor, I think, actually did come out with an underdrive. But let's do the opposite. Let's boost this mid-range, and let's boost it like a Klon. Let's come up here to this 1.6, 1.5, whatever, and let's cut a little low end out. And mid-range on a Klon, or high end on a Klon, sorry, let's leave that up. High end on a Klon, we don't want to, we'll add a little bit because a lot of times people run that treble knob up just a bit. And we'll see what we get. Here's off and on. To me, that has that whiny vocal quality that a Klon has. I'm boosting a lot of mids, and that can be very useful. If you want to get more of a tube screamer-esque sound, I would bring it down to like the 650 range, 550, 650, whatever. But I would try something like this, and I might get an EQ that resembles a little more of something like that. So play that same thing again.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's not an overdrive, but it's driving the amp more a little bit, and it gives you that EQ, and that's really, that's half of why we use some of these pedals.
Yeah.
There's a big reason why the Klon is big with the Strat guys. John Mayer, there's a reason he likes the TS10.
Yeah, not just the game.
It's not just the game. The EQ is a big part of it, right? Or else the Timmy would have destroyed the overdrive world, right? If we didn't like the EQ, right? It's just this transparent, here's my Marshall clean, turn this pedal on, sounds like my Marshall dirty.
Just drive.
And the Timmy does a really great job of that, of course. But that's not always what you want.
Yeah.
And so, maybe you've got, where this is especially useful, you ever play a 3 pickup Strat? Very few of them are exceptional. On the bridge pickup by itself. Yeah. A lot of times they're overly thin. And a lot of times you're playing a Strat on the bridge pickup and you're kind of just going, I wish it sounded like a Telly. You know what I mean? It's like the ideal Strat. You totally could
it's on a button.
Just give it some more, and that can be your sort of Band-Aid fix for when you want to use that position instead of avoiding it like a lot of people.
Yeah, it seems like a good way to take a solo as well, like we were saying before. Try an EQ as a solo button instead of a drive.
Yeah, and you post amp here, you also have the ability to really just have control over your level.
Yeah,
so instead of just boosting, a lot of times we're trying to come up for a solo, and when we use anything that's in front of the amp, we're fighting the amp's compression.
Yeah, true.
Because if the amp's already compressing, doesn't have headroom, we don't get a lot of lift. After the amp gives us the ability, if you tell it 4 dB, it's going up 4 dB.
Yeah.
If you tell it 6 dB, it's going up 6 dB.
It's not hitting anything to limit it. Yeah.
And if you don't have a sound guy who's like kind of attentive, if you're like in a if you're in a cover band and the sound guy is
Also the bartender.
yeah, also the bartender. I was gonna say getting paid in beers because I definitely have had that.
Yeah.
Where the sound guy is probably just a functioning alcoholic,
Mm-hmm.
who lives up the street,
Right.
and
He's not listening for your solo.
no,
moment.
he's not, and I've played in places where they don't know your record at all.
No,
They didn't listen ahead of time, And then I've played in places where they're 100% ready. They listen to the record before you get there,
That's nice.
and they go, "Oh yeah, I hear what you guys are doing," and everything, or in a church setting. Where you're doing a lot of songs in the same rotation. Eventually the sound guy, if he's paying attention, he knows the song arrangement.
Yeah.
And he knows when a lead's coming up.
Right, here it comes.
Especially when you do 3-4 services on a Sunday. By the third, fourth one, he's pretty used to what he's hearing, right?
I know how this goes.
So you need like 5-6 dB minimum to really come up above a mix. You need a lot. You need a lot. So you could do that. You could do that after, before. You can really change the sound of your guitar. But to me, this is really the more you do this, the more you'll develop an understanding of what frequencies you want in a sound before you go searching for them.
Right.
And just to demonstrate that, I liked this sound right here, the Tube Screamer-esque one. If you wanted both of that, you throw it in the middle at 850 or something, and you're going to get some of that, what we call the Klon mid-range, some of what we call the low and mid-range, because now we're really right in the middle. So I'll let you play us out with this, because I think any more, and if they haven't clicked off the video by now, they're very dedicated to EQ.
They really want to EQ like a pro.
They want to EQ like a pro. That's the goal, man.
That's awesome.
You got all these tools, you might as well take control.
Yeah.
And get exactly the sound you want.
I've been Sooze.
I've been HW.